infrastructure, you can take investment in building, you can take economic activity, and you can make decent estimates of how these can be covered, either statutorily or through other processes. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Finally, what does it add up to? This is the GAR 2015. In fact, those of us who will be in Cancun next month will find the global risk assessment actually being put out, the global atlas will be put out. So this work arrived at that. You can see India's at the 3 billion plus risk level. And more interesting, the Chinese looked at the work that had been done here, and they published in 2015, and you can see India's covered in fairly great detail here, estimates of economic loss. So we have unfortunately not taken this work very much further. It's been sitting on the shelf for more than 10 years or so. The Chinese have taken it, and they've applied it. Those of us who've seen work in China and dealt with that are very critical. So how can we take it forward? We can take it forward because this method has been applied, it's been tried, it's been implemented. But the interesting thing we have in the last 10 years is we actually have really good data in this country. We have good data of economic output from night lights intensity that's there. That's looking at economic output across the country. Right down to the village level, there are estimates that are available because of this. We have estimates of proxy wealth, so we know what the economic output is. This is from a database that we work with the Ministry of Urban and Rural Development that's there. We have an idea where people are. We have an idea of what kind of houses are located. We have this data now available for 640,000 locations across the country, every census settlement, and now ward level data is available. Same thing for roofs. We have data on water and sanitation, and we have data on power. All of this data is available right down to the village level, is geocoded, and it's available, which basically means if you have risk data and you have your fragility equations, you can actually drill this down right down to the risk level. So what does one want to do? My last slide here. I think we are ready just now. Again, as I said, you know, in 2013, we thought that we were in a Mangalayan kind of moment. We were there, we had arrived in this method. I'm suggesting that we actually are ready now to construct a digital settlement composite hazard risk and vulnerability atlas, which actually goes down, not only covering every state and UT, every district, every block, which I've shown you 12 years ago. We can actually take it down pretty much to the settlement level, and it will involve building the lifeline structure. I showed you that, estimated loss of life, and if we can establish hybrid loss exigency curves. And this is a tricky one, because I know for the Northeast, having worked in many parts of the Northeast, actually establishing that because we haven't got good studies is difficult to do. But in practice, my sense is, having done this not only here, but in maybe 50 countries across the world, that this could be done in 2 to 3 years, and it really doesn't cost us any money. It will cost us probably about 150 to 200 crores to build this out for all our 30 states. The states now have much more resources than they had in the past. After that, you really have to work on deriving the capital implementation and financing plans. Because doing the science is great, but unless you have the implementation and financing plans that actually work at sub-district level, and I would say we can do it in many places, up to settlement level, and that's been demonstrated by, IMD, GSI, et cetera, that will probably cost us another couple of years, and take us a couple of years, and probably cost us 50 to 75 crores to do. But finally, you have to build a near real-time response network. And, the models are great, but the network cannot work without models. So you need both things. You can have a wonderful control room, you can have a whole range of processes, but if you don't have the analytical models that go from events that happen on a weekly basis all the way up to 100 or 200 years, you're not able to actually, manage these processes. The Chinese are absolutely there. I mean, I've seen their systems. I've seen them working in real time. And we had a discussion with DG IMD not so long ago about whether we can try and replicate these kind of processes in the country. So all that I'm saying is, this is possible. We've done it here. It's been implementable. It works. Many other countries have done it much more effectively in the last 10 decades. There's no reason, in the last decade or so, it's no reason why we can't do it. And it's not going to cost us very much money to do. It requires coordination. It requires connection between the states. And it requires very high quality science to make this happen. But we have all of that in this country. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Revi. May I now request Dr. Anant, Director of Urban Labs, to talk on social aspects of risk.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you, everyone in the hall. I want to begin by saying that I'm actually very excited by maps, data, and models. Makes me feel heady. Makes me feel very excited. It makes me feel like it gives me some kind of control over the world. But actually, a lot of the time when I get the sense that we don't have the necessary control on the real world. And that's where I ended up actually doing a lot of work around social geographies. So the issue that I was going to talk about, which is the social aspects of risk, I want to start by saying that maps are essentially about power. And I use the word power in a very positive sense. Power can do things. You can decide who can be saved. You can also decide who has to be left out. The 30% whom we are going to dump is going to be decided by us, and that's going to be done by using a map. And that is the social aspect of risk. So what I'm going to do is to talk about this in about 3 quick units. The first unit is about what exactly is social about maps, what exactly is social about risk, how do we ask questions about it. The second unit is what I'm going to talk about, what kind of knowledge is required, what kinds of tools, what kinds of techniques do we need to use. And in the third one, I'm going to be talking about what specific steps can we take to move forward from where we are. Questions like, where exactly is the risk? Deciding what do we want to call as risk? Deciding whether to displace that risk or to mitigate it, or to say that it is going to happen at a certain point of time, and we may or may not be prepared to do it. These are all about power. These are all about the social decisions, political decisions that we make. And until now, we did not really have appropriate frameworks for doing research on that. We do not have sufficient understanding. Very often what happens with risk is a lot of unstated things quickly kick in because it happens in a very short time frame. You have to respond to it very quickly, and therefore a lot of assumptions are made about what is the right thing to do, and then we move on from there. For example, one of the things that we have noticed in a number of cases when we think about how we have responded to risk, what you actually realize is that risk has not been mitigated, it has been displaced, either in time, that is by postponing it, or by moving it over the costs of the risk to some other social group or to some other region, and life moves on. And we do not have the tools and techniques for tracking how this has been done and what the displaced risks' ultimate costs are and who pays it. Ultimately, we can say that in the aggregate it affects the entire region, in the aggregate it affects the entire community, entire society, entire nation, but that is not helpful because the cost, as Revi was pointing out, is very often borne by households, and we don't know which households are these, where are they located, how are they coping with the risk, how are they coping with the disaster. To be able to deal with this then, we need to understand the history of disaster, history of risk, how it has been produced at a given point of time and where it has moved. One great example of a problem of that kind is all of the urban disasters which we have been having in the last 4 or 5 years, in the last 15 or 20 years. Right? These are disasters that are happening because landscape that has been settled over decades, often centuries, is now very rapidly being altered. Commons are being used for other purposes. So ecological commons are lost. They have a function, and we don't know enough about that function because of the very rapid way in which things have changed, and we don't have sufficient knowledge about it. So how do we build these histories? Do we have the possibility of building these histories from the available data sets? Do we have the archives? Can we actually pull together all of that data to tell the stories of each of these disasters that are happening? On the ground experience very often is that it is not so easy, because a lot of this data has actually not been recorded. It has been distributed across different departments. And one of the things that we keep coming across constantly is the challenge of how to even curate the data that we need. I can give you one very simple example. 3 years ago, we started mapping waterlogging and flooding points in Hyderabad. And we discovered something very interesting. The municipal corporation has one map of waterlogging points. The revenue department has a completely different map of waterlogging points. The traffic police has a very different map of the waterlogging points. The reason is very simple. The traffic police is concerned about waterlogging because it disrupts traffic. The revenue department is concerned about it because it has to rush in a certain kind of relief to that area. The municipal corporation is worried about clearing up the clogged up drainage holes. Now, how do we deal with this, right? How do we create the institutional coherence that can actually produce information at the appropriate scale where coherent action can take place? So the issue then ultimately comes down to one of how do we decide what is the scale at which knowledge needs to be produced, organized, curated? How do we produce the institutional coherence at that scale? Should this be happening from the starting point of risk and vulnerable populations? Or should this be starting from the power to act? Which institution has the power to act over which jurisdiction? And how will they come together to make something happen or not happen? And we don't have easy answers to this. So at this point of time, all one can say is that there is now a tremendous amount of data available from multiple sources. We can pull the data together, but we need to start asking very intelligent questions. This data doesn't cost a lot. We have produced in Hyderabad with no money at all, using easily available online data, all kinds of maps about water flows in the city. It's possible to produce those kinds of analysis with no money at all. It's very easy to do it. But the question is, who gets to ask questions? How do we put those questions together? How do we collate them? And then that knowledge, how do we socialize it? And that is where I think we often run into problems, because socializing knowledge in itself is a game of power. Which institution wants to act, which institution doesn't want to act? How are we taking decisions about which are the places that need to be saved, which are the places that do not need to be saved? Are we even interested in saving a particular place, or are we interested in saving the investments in that place or the operations around that place? And these are decisions that we have to make very deliberately and very openly, and we often have to make these decisions with a lot of cold-heartedness. When we take cold-hearted decisions like that, and if we do not have the courage to be transparent about it, that is when knowledge becomes completely inaccessible. I can say that it is very important for me to protect this particular railway line, even if it washes off an entire village. And if I'm able to say that with cold-heartedness, but with the necessary transparency, then I can do something about the people in the village. But if I do not have that confidence and courage, then I'm going to mess it up. And I think very often that's the kind of challenge that we are seeing all around us, and we have to figure out ways of talking about it. I'll stop here and we can take the conversation later.
Thank you, Dr. Anant. You brought us back on the schedule. Thank you very much. May I now request Shri D.D. Sharma, Special Secretary Revenue, Government of Himachal Pradesh. He will talk on risk assessment of Himachal Pradesh.
Honorable Chair, Co-Chair, fellow panelists, and distinguished participants in this august house, I have been given this opportunity to discuss on the topic risk assessment of Himachal Pradesh. As we all know, the state of Himachal Pradesh is vulnerable to multiple natural and other hazards. While knowledge about the extent, type, and magnitude of various hazards at state level exists, little systematic information exists about vulnerability physical at the level of physical, social, and economic at the district, block, and village level, and to minimize the disaster impact and damages in hazard-prone areas. Information on extent, nature, and frequency of hazards, on gravity of vulnerability of the people, property, infrastructure, and environment is required to be assessed and mapped through scientific techniques. That's why this study was entrusted to Thorough Leading as Limited and the State Disaster Management Authority with its own resources. The state resources conducted this study. The high-powered committee, which was constituted in 2001, gave its report in 2002, and out of the 33 hazards or the disasters which occur in our country, 25 they are witnessed in Himachal Pradesh. So we are highly vulnerable to different types of hazards or disasters. The risk of disaster is gradually increasing in the state. It is very crucial to assess the extent of vulnerability and quantify the risk because of resource depletion, population rise, change in land use patterns, erratic extreme weather conditions, and geophysical changes, planning challenges, and poverty. So these are the factors which are gradually increasing. So risk assessment of Himachal Pradesh that has been completed in 2016, and this is the only second state of the country to carry out state level risk assessment. The first is Gujarat. First state of the country to have the digital risk atlas and comprehensive training of officials of line departments and district disaster management authorities. We are not having we have put it on the website, and we are also giving the training at the district and at the subdivision and even at the village level for what the data we have accumulated from conducting these studies. So we have completed recently about 30 disaster management plans for the departments, and we are at the stage of completing the revising the state disaster management plan. So this data has actually helped us in completing our plans also. So this has generated a basic data which is very much required in-depth analysis and quantify disaster risk levels, and to map all hazard-prone areas of the state up to block level, that is earthquake, which by far remains still the major, you can say the disaster or the frequency is less, but it still is a major threat. And landslide, then this earthquake triggered landslides and floods, drought, avalanches, glacial lake outburst floods, forest fires, cloud bursts, dam bursts, and chemical, industrial, all type of these hazards or disasters. And we have used the 1 is equal to 50,000 scale. The objectives of risk assessment was to assess the extent of vulnerability across the state, exposure to people, infrastructure, and economic activities, to identify and propose location-specific detailed solutions to avoid hazard risks by implementing structural and non-structural mitigation and prevention measures. The need of this study was to provide recommendations for risk mitigation, emergency preparedness, disaster management plan preparation, mainstreaming disaster risk reduction into development. I think that is the crux of all such studies. If we mainstream these in our developmental policies, programs, and projects, only then these are useful. Effective resource allocation for capacity building. Identification of the risk proneness for a unit of inquiry and design of mitigation, prevention, preparedness measures, mainstreaming, investment plan, development plan, strategic plan, regional development, infrastructural planning, and all policy integration of all these data into the policy issues, and then vision plan, scenario planning, or exercise. Risk assessment, the key objectives which I'm just highlighting: early warning and response. Such data can be used for emergency situations and also contingency plan and development of standard operating procedures, because if we have the data on drought affected areas or flood affected areas, that we can use in early warning and response, and disaster proofing investments and schemes also, and sector specific intervention in education, agriculture, health, public utilities, water supply, transport, communication, all vital areas of public importance. From these studies, we have come to the conclusion that about half of the analyzed losses are accounted by floods, and majority of the losses are to the roads and basic buildings, maybe residential, non-residential. Roads on tectonically active mountain areas are prone to both landslides as well as undercutting of the roads by active stream erosion. It is suggested that valley section of the roads are built after due modeling of flood risk, especially the valley areas and bridges. Detailed delineation of high landslide risk areas should be done for all major and critical roads along the slope sections. The Public Works Department and BRO, which is looking after the border roads, have already had such information on major faults and landslide history. Landslide prevention measures should be implemented during construction phase itself. If the financial arrangements are done, or then the DPR itself, then the roads can have more durability. Both structural as well as vegetative measures will be necessary, and diversion of runoff, development of alternate road sections for diversion in the high landslide risk areas should be given priority. Early warning systems based on surface deformation in landslide prone area can be set up. Also, old bridges can be monitored using the monitored system. The mobile apps can be used to divert traffic to subsidiary roads and prioritizing the traffic. These are the suggestions which have been given. Drought losses to horticulture is the next loss which needs to be addressed, because Himachal Pradesh is, and particularly the Shimla district, that is the fruit ball in the state or the country. So it is very important that drought losses to horticulture, they should be minimized. Long dry spells, especially in the post-winter and pre-monsoon period, as well as hailstorms during fruiting period, account for most of the losses in horticulture sector. 5,000 crore economy, that is the fruit industry in Himachal. Moisture conservation measures, small farm ponds, and micro irrigation systems to protect from the droughts may be piloted in areas with neighboring springs, and also rainwater harvesting along with micro irrigation may be attempted to save the crops and plants. These can be replicated once the results prove satisfactory. Every year, the hailstorm damage is a major cause of losses to apple crop. Hail nets are the best option, already proved on ground, and autonomous as well as government promoted dissemination has reduced hailstorm risk. Hailstorm risk insurance has not penetrated in the apple growing region, and it should be promoted to transfer some of the risks. Climate change induced long-term risks are being felt by apple growers in the lower altitudes of the traditional apple growing areas. Careful monitoring of weather patterns and climate change informed crop diversification measures are necessary. As far as the building infrastructure is concerned, the rapid visual screening of the buildings across Himachal Pradesh has shown that significant proportion of the buildings are vulnerable. Retrofitting of the buildings are, as well as dissemination of the improved building technologies are necessary to promote safe housing. As many buildings are built over time, with additional floors are added to old buildings, expert advisory support at village block level will be necessary to ensure that the vulnerability is not increased by adding new stories. There are certain maps. This is a map for earthquake hazard risk zonation, BIS seismic zonation as per the BIS code. So these dark brown areas, the crux of the study is that the areas which have been shown in dark this color, they are the highly, you can say the more populated areas. They lie in the seismic zone 4, so the 5. So the vulnerability is more in those areas where the population is more, so it becomes more critical. These are the floodplains of Satluj Basin. which have been identified the people who reside by these slopes. They have been identified, and this flood-prone river sections they have been identified in this basin, and similarly in the Beas basin also, because this Satluj and Beas basin we experience floods every year. This is a glacial lake outburst flood hazard risk zonation. There are not only this is a sort of flash floods which take place even on a broad daylight when there is no clouds, there is no chance of any rainfall or any flood. But the things which are happening in the Himalayas, like the merging of the various lakes, glacial lakes, and forming a bigger lake, and then giving way, and then inundating down the line, that can take place even on a broad daylight, and that causes a lot of damage not only to the area which is pertinent to these rivers, but also number of hydroelectric projects they have come up along these rivers. So this mapping that has also been done on the Revi basin and Satluj basin. Himachal Pradesh forest every year there is a lot of forest fires, and sometimes people think that by burning the needles they will get more grass and all. So most of the 90% fires, forest fires, they are man-induced fires. So these are the areas which are more prone to block-wise percentage that has been calculated for high and very high forest fire risks in Himachal Pradesh, so they can take the preventive measures and all the traditional and modern methods of fire combating or fire prevention. These are some of the Himachal Pradesh has a very high vulnerability for landslide, and that landslide vulnerability zonation has been done. We have identified about 24 landslides in Himachal Pradesh, which are about 24/7. They are active. Like Urni Dhang, we have spent about 15 crores on that containing of that landslide, which is still continuing, and we had to divert the road and construct 2 bridges. So the cost of this rehabilitation or reconstruction is very high due to these landslides, and there are about 24 which we have identified. There are many more. So the vulnerability zonation has been done, and they are a threat to the smooth flow of the transport. Similarly, the Himachal Pradesh composite risk zonation, annualized composite risk hazards here, that has been identified, and earthquake, agriculture, drought, hydrometric floods, and hailstorm, that has been mapped. As Sir was talking about the social aspect of disaster management, so the gender issues, and then the people who are handicapped or the old, aged, ailing, that type of that vulnerability, social pattern vulnerability has also been done. This slide shows the challenged or the vulnerability of challenged or differently able population. So we can take more remedial measures where there is more population of these challenged or differently able population. So that has also been done. I am not showing all the maps because the number of maps, there is a big atlas which has been prepared by Tarun Leading Edge Limited. So Himachal Pradesh drought risk zonation, agricultural loss due to drought is also very high, and it is a lingering, long-term, long duration this hazard or the disaster. So that has also been mapped. These are the critical facility map of Shimla city. My younger brother, he will be discussing on the atlas or whatever for the Shimla city itself. So these are some of the critical, because we have the information of the critical, the buildings like hospitals or some important government buildings or other structures, so that can help us in our emergency situation. So this was, but at the end I would like to say that we should take steps to reduce the risks which are already existing, and we should not create more risks by our developmental activities. And mainstreaming of disaster risk reduction into policies, plans, and projects is very essential. Otherwise, we will be creating more risks for us and for our progeny. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr.